The little boy came running into the middle of the sunlit street with tears streaming down his dusty cheeks, one shoe missing and his tiny fists shaking with fear. He stopped in front of a group of leather-jacketed bikers, looked up at the biggest man among them, and cried, "He hurt my grandma." For a moment, the roaring motorcycles seemed to go silent, even though their engines were still running. The boy pointed toward the old house at the end of the street, but what frightened the bikers most was what they saw when they arrived. The front door was already hanging from one broken hinge, and deep scratches marked the wooden floor leading into the house. Someone had broken that door from the inside. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can give people a second chance and that protecting the vulnerable still matters, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Smile Circle. Because sometimes the people who look the toughest on the outside are carrying the softest hearts inside. The boy's name was Tobin Mercer, an 8-year-old who spent most afternoons with his grandmother, Maribel Mercer, in a small yellow house surrounded by flower pots and an old wooden porch. Maribel was 72 and had raised Tobin since he was very young. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, left water outside for stray animals, and never allowed a hungry child to leave her porch without a sandwich. Tobin adored her. To him, she wasn't simply his grandmother. She was his entire world. That morning had begun peacefully. Sunlight poured through the kitchen windows while Maribel prepared blueberry pancakes, and Tobin sat at the table drawing pictures of motorcycles because he had recently become fascinated by the local motorcycle club that passed through town every weekend. He had never spoken to them, but he liked the deep sound of their engines and imagined the riders were heroes from an old adventure movie. Maribel smiled as she watched him draw. She told him that people should never be judged by their clothes, their tattoos, or the noise their machines made. What mattered was what they did when somebody needed help. Tobin didn't know how important those words would become before the day was over. Around noon, a dark pickup truck stopped outside the house. A broad-shouldered man named Garrick Voss stepped out. He had been trying to buy several houses on the street because a construction company wanted the entire block for a commercial project. Most homeowners had already agreed to sell, but Maribel had refused. The yellow house had belonged to her late husband, and she had promised herself she would never surrender it simply because someone with money wanted the land. Garrick walked up the porch and demanded that she reconsider. Maribel calmly refused. Tobin watched from behind the curtains as Garrick's voice became louder. He saw his grandmother standing straight even though her hands were trembling. She told the man that he could have his money, but he could never buy the memories inside those walls. Garrick left angrily, but not before warning her that refusing him would make things difficult. Maribel tried to hide her fear from Tobin. She returned to the kitchen and told him everything was fine, but children often notice what adults try desperately to conceal. Tobin saw the way she held her shoulder. He saw the sadness in her eyes. He knew something had changed. Later that afternoon, Maribel went outside to collect laundry from the line. Tobin was in the backyard chasing a bright blue butterfly when he heard a crash. He turned and saw his grandmother stumble near the porch. Garrick was there again. Tobin froze. He couldn't hear every word, but he saw Garrick grab Maribel's arm. She tried to pull away. When he shoved her, she fell against the porch railing. Tobin screamed and ran toward them, but Garrick shouted at him to stay back. The boy's heart pounded. He wanted to protect his grandmother, but he was only 8 years old. He grabbed the old garden shovel and stood between them, crying that Garrick should leave. For one terrifying second, Garrick stared at him. Then something unexpected happened. A loud motorcycle engine thundered from the nearby road. Garrick looked toward the sound, hesitated, and hurried back to his truck. He drove away before anyone could stop him. Tobin ran to Maribel. She was conscious, but her wrist was badly bruised and she looked frightened. She hugged him tightly and told him not to be afraid. But Tobin knew she was afraid too. Maribel wanted to call the police, but her phone had fallen during the struggle and shattered. She promised Tobin they would go to a neighbor for help. Yet before they could leave, another crash came from inside the house. The back door had been forced open. Tobin grabbed his grandmother's hand. Maribel told him to run. The boy refused. Then another sound came from the hallway, followed by the splintering of wood. Maribel pushed Tobin toward the backyard and told him to find help. He ran as fast as his little legs could carry him, tears blurring his vision. That was when he saw the bikers. A group of riders had stopped near the corner, preparing to continue their afternoon ride. At the front was Ronan Vale, a former mechanic with silver streaks in his dark hair and a reputation for being intimidating. Beside him were Cashin Reed, Briar Knox, and Merritt Shaw. Tobin ran straight toward them. He stumbled, fell, scraped his knee, got back up, and finally reached Ronan. "He hurt my grandma," Tobin cried. Ronan immediately shut off his motorcycle. He didn't ask whether Tobin was exaggerating. He didn't laugh at the accusation. He simply crouched down until his eyes were level with the boys and asked where his grandmother was. Tobin pointed toward the yellow house. The bikers followed him. But when they reached the property, they stopped. The front door was broken inward. The frame was shattered. There were scratches across the floor. A chair had been knocked over. Ronan's expression changed instantly. He told Tobin to stay behind him while the bikers entered the house. They searched room after room until they found Maribel in the kitchen. She was frightened but conscious, clutching a small wooden picture frame against her chest. When she saw Tobin, she began to cry with relief. Tobin rushed into her arms. Ronan noticed something strange. The broken front door wasn't damaged from someone forcing their way inside. It had been smashed outward. Someone inside the house had hit it with tremendous force. Then Ronan saw the marks on the floor. They led toward the back room. He followed them and discovered a heavy wooden cabinet lying on its side. Behind it was a small opening in the wall, large enough for someone to crawl through. The bikers realized what had happened. Garrick had entered the house through the back, but Maribel had locked herself in the storage room. When Garrick tried to break through the door, she had used the heavy cabinet to block it. Eventually, the pressure forced the door outward and shattered the frame. But Garrick had escaped through the broken back entrance before the bikers arrived. Ronan called emergency services and stayed beside Maribel until help arrived. For the first time that day, Maribel allowed herself to cry. She told Ronan that she was ashamed because she had been afraid. Ronan shook his head and told her that courage didn't mean feeling no fear. Courage meant protecting someone you loved even while your hands were shaking. Tobin listened carefully. Then he quietly asked Ronan why bikers would care about an old woman they had never met. Ronan looked at Maribel, then at Tobin. He explained that years earlier, when he was a teenager with nowhere to go, an elderly woman had once given him food, a blanket, and a place to sleep during a terrible storm. She never asked for anything in return. He had carried that kindness with him ever since. Maribel smiled through her tears. She told him that woman sounded like someone she would have liked. Ronan smiled back and said she probably would have liked Maribel too. The police later found Garrick after witnesses reported his truck. Evidence from the damaged house, the neighbors' accounts, and the bruises on Maribel's arm finally gave her the courage to stand up against him. The construction company abandoned its plan when the truth became public. But the story didn't end with an arrest. The bikers kept visiting Maribel. They repaired her door. They fixed the broken fence. They replaced the shattered windows. They even repainted the porch. Tobin watched them work from a chair, fascinated as these intimidating men carefully planted flowers beside his grandmother's steps. One afternoon, Ronan handed Tobin a small motorcycle-shaped wooden ornament he had carved himself. Tobin held it tightly and asked if he could someday ride a motorcycle. Ronan laughed and told him that first he had to learn how to ride a bicycle without falling. Tobin smiled. Maribel watched from the porch. The same woman who had feared losing everything that morning was now surrounded by people who had chosen to become part of her family. Weeks later, the yellow house looked brighter than it had in years. A new door stood where the broken one had been. Tobin planted flowers beside the walkway, and Maribel sat beneath the afternoon sun drinking tea. When Ronan and the bikers arrived, Tobin ran toward them without fear. The boy who had once believed strangers were frightening now understood something much deeper. Sometimes the people who look dangerous are the ones who stop when a child cries for help. Sometimes a broken door becomes the beginning of a new chapter. And sometimes kindness travels through years, passing from one person to another until it reaches someone who desperately needs it. Maribel never forgot that afternoon. Neither did Tobin. Years later, Tobin would remember the moment he ran into the street crying for help. He would remember Ronan kneeling down instead of towering over him. He would remember the motorcycles arriving beneath the bright afternoon sun. But most of all, he would remember what his grandmother had taught him that morning: never judge a person by what they look like. Because the real measure of a person isn't the clothes they wear, the vehicle they drive, or the reputation that follows them. It is what they do when someone weaker needs a hand. And on that unforgettable afternoon, a group of bikers proved that sometimes the strongest people in the world are the ones who choose to be gentle. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes there is still goodness in the world, and subscribe to Smile's Circle for more emotional stories about kindness, courage, family, and second chances. Before you leave, comment, "Kindness still matters," below if you believe one small act of compassion can change someone's entire life.